evening. This is Peter Hammond in the studio for From the Frontline. Tonight, Meltdown in Zimbabwe. I have in the studio Reverend John Clifford and also Elishka, who has been in Zimbabwe very recently. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So, first of all, John, just give us a bit of an understanding. What on earth is going on in Zimbabwe? We're hearing some very disturbing reports. What do you know?
Well, if you type Zimbabwe in on Google or social media, even just a Facebook search or something like that, all kinds of crazy things are going to come up right now. You've got people who are rioting in the streets, closing down roads. You have civilians attacking military personnel and police personnel. And you have government officials, military police, who are attacking civilians, beating them in the streets, burning down houses, physically assaulting people publicly, clearly trying to send a message out to everybody: do not mess with the current government, do not oppose us. So that's just the craziness of what's going on right now. A lot of people are talking about this is like a civil war. You use the term meltdown, and it really does seem like a meltdown that's happening over there, just chaos. If you look at video footage of what's been going on in recent weeks, people are looting shops, people are breaking things down, burning things. And this is all sort of the climax of a very long history of political tension, of opposition and persecution from the government. It's been like a boiling pot, and now everything is just bursting. So we'll probably have to just get into some more of those details. But right now, it's just crazy. People are afraid to leave their homes. People are afraid to go to work. I heard just recently of one man who, what needs to go to work to provide for his family, but is afraid to leave his family because it's just so dangerous. He doesn't know what will happen. There might be police who come and start beating his family. He needs to be there to protect them, but he also can't provide for them. So it's just a very messy, difficult to unwrap situation right now.
Now, Zimbabwe has been an important mission field for our mission for many years, right back to our first year, 1982. We've been going in Zimbabwe. It's been a very high priority, taking boxes with love, doing leadership training, ministering. They are near neighbors. And part of the Great Commission, making disciples, teaching obedience, that's why we've been there, but also loving our neighbor. And the Bible tells us to remember the persecuted, those who are suffering, because we're all part of the same body. You can't be unconcerned when one part of the body of Christ is suffering. So over the years, you've made many mission trips to Zimbabwe. Tell us some of what you've seen in the past, John. What you observed and noticed of the needs and of the problems that you confront there.
Well, when I started going in, obviously Robert Mugabe was still in control. He's been overthrown, and the current leader or ruler or dictator is now Ed Mnangagwa. And so he's ruling now. But when I was going in, it was under Mugabe control. It was very difficult to get in the country, first of all. Just going through any border crossing, you were bound to face corruption. Anybody who has a badge or seems official at any level would try and get you to pay some kind of bribe. So just getting in was very difficult and stressful. Then traveling around the country was almost impossible. One mission that we did, we went through 90 police stops, just traveling through the country. And that wasn't even, we didn't go all over the country. We went to maybe 2 or 3 provinces of the country. Almost the entire northwestern part of the country we didn't even touch. So that's 90 police stops. And at every single one of those police stops, they're asking to check your vehicle for fire extinguishers, triangles, reflector jackets. They want to check every single light on your vehicle to make sure it's working. Because if there's any problem, of course, you have to pay a fine. Some exorbitant fine that is usually a bribe. They'll say you can pay the fine, but you can pay a fine without us giving you a receipt. And so the fine will be less, aka pay us a bribe. So traveling around the country is restricted. Getting into the country is very difficult. Then what you have is economic depression there. In 2008 into 2009, there was hyperinflation. It was calculated upwards of 1 billion% calculated annually. The Zimbabwean dollar was worthless, less than worthless. It wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Literally, the paper was more valuable than the actual monetary notes. So there was nothing in the shops. You couldn't buy food, bread, milk, anything that was of any value. You couldn't get fuel or anything like that. So people had just started coming out of that. The US dollar was introduced into the country and people started to trade a little bit more.
Basically, they abandoned their own currency.
Yes, they abandoned their own the currency. They were trading with the US dollar. And so what you had was a country where there was no farming, no industry, no circulation of wealth, borrowing finances from another country so that they could just trade a little bit. Difficult to move around, almost impossible to get in or do anything there. And so you have people living like that. And then what happened was because they started to run out of US dollars to trade with, the banks started to give people promissory notes, which is bond coins, or so they call them. So essentially what it means is the bank was saying, we've got all these US dollars sort of backed up somewhere. We're going to keep them and we're going to give you these other things that are the equivalent of $1, but we're going to keep the actual US dollar.
It's unlikely they even had them.
Yes, they didn't have them. Of course they didn't have them. So people started trading with these fake US. It really is. It was like monopoly money. But you can't trade internationally with them. And because there's no farming, no industry, no infrastructure, no circulation of wealth, what are they going to do with that monopoly money? They're going to circulate it amongst themselves, but it's just going to spiral and spiral and spiral until eventually people are impoverished. And so at this stage, Zimbabwe was sort of hitting once again very serious economic problems. People were starting to go hungry. There were all kinds of sicknesses and diseases going on. There was no electricity in many parts of Zimbabwe. You could have power cuts or power outages for 8-9 hours in a day, 12 hours in a day, sometimes longer than that. In some areas, they would cut the water off for 8-9 hours in a day. People who were going to doctors or hospitals were being operated on or examined under torchlight because the doctors didn't have electricity for any of the equipment to work, including the lights to examine your body. So that all was going on until Edson Mnangagwa took over last year. And so he took over, and a lot of people were saying, well, he's much better than Mugabe. At least Mugabe is gone. He was the one who was responsible for all of our problems. But of course he wasn't. Mugabe was just the face of the socialist, communist, humanist political party that was oppressing the people. And so it was the same political party with a different face. Ed Mnangagwa took over. And actually things have gotten worse since he's taken over. Not that he's any better or worse than Mugabe, but he's just the same. He's just a different face to it.
He was actually the personal bodyguard, personal assistant, the security minister, and he was even, for many years, Mugabe's handpicked successor, was he not?
Yeah, he was. In fact, he earned himself the nickname Crocodile because of his guerrilla warfare tactics and his shrewd political tactics as well. He's largely responsible for the slaughter of thousands of Matabele. He has stabbed many people in the back politically. And so I don't know why people thought he was some great hope. It was just disillusionment, hoping for the best, I guess.
Just the human desire for hope.
I think so.
Yeah.
And
so then, before we get into the history of how we got to this absolute shambles that we are now, Eliska, you were part of a recent Frontline Fellowship mission team, but your first visit to Zimbabwe. So what were your impressions of Zimbabwe? What did you learn? What are you learning now from contacts that you made there in Zimbabwe?
Well, what I hear now is very different from what I experienced in September on the mission. When we entered, it was quite easy to get into the country. We didn't have a single roadblock or anyone stopping us, asking us for bribes. And so many people we visited, especially in the old age homes, said they have hope now for the country. And a lot of people were just positive about what's going on, saying that they feel like it's going to change now and that Mnangagwa might make things better. But I think it was just kind of the quietness before the storm. From one of the contacts, the pastor who sent me a report on what he wrote about what's going on now. When they had house evictions, so they told people to leave their houses, so they're going to destroy the houses. He went to the court and asked them to intervene to stop this. And he said, even back in 2015, when you did these evictions, it was illegal and there's still a case against you. So why are you even doing it now? And he said, we planned on doing it earlier, but Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF ordered us to do it only after the elections. So they had to wait until a while after the elections, and then they could start doing the house evictions, taking people out and destroying their homes.
Do we know a reason for that destroying of the homes? I mean, why would the government do this?
I'm not entirely sure. I do know that the people who are getting upset, and obviously because of fuel prices doubling, no medicine, no food, and so on, the government or the police forces are brutally attacking the people, and I think that's part of it, taking their houses away and part of breaking down their hope, I think.
Well, in the past, I remember when they had a massive destruction of the homes of about 1.5 million people back in June, July of 2005. That was because they just had an election and the people in those areas had voted against ZANU-PF, the Communist Party. For many years, they were just a one-party state, but then in order to get more foreign aid, they've got to give the semblance of being multi-party. But the way they rigged their elections, in fact, even when they've lost elections, like obviously they lost in 2008, but they still managed to end up with a power-sharing arrangement where Mugabe still remained on top, and the person who'd won the election became the prime minister, a newly created post. But they punished the people who had voted against the government by destroying their homes. 1.5 million people's homes were flattened by bulldozers and so on, which include, of course, many hundreds of churches. Sure. So this is a communist tactic over there. So what are people telling you now? Communications with people that you might have met or heard from since the latest chaos in Zimbabwe?
Well, it is a mess. They told about they had a 3-day stay away, which meant they were not allowed to go onto the streets or anything just because of the police and the forces there killing people and how dangerous it is. And they had an internet shutdown for, I don't know exactly how long, I think 6 days, from the one Thursday to the Wednesday. And they were just unable to connect to the people outside. Yeah, the government shut down the internet because they only have 8 internet providers in Zimbabwe. So they are able to do that. And so also the people going onto the streets, even when they are not in the riot or on strike, they are just being taken away. People are just beaten and shot at and so on by the police and the forces there. And so the lady who was our host, she shared how they were not able to help the people in the old age homes who are in need of their medicine, obviously, and everything for those 3 days. But luckily now again they are able to go there. But she calls it a humanitarian crisis.
Humanitarian crisis indeed. Now, bear in mind, I was brought up in Zimbabwe, what today is Zimbabwe, what then was Rhodesia, and it was actually a paradise. So when I lived there, it was the cleanest, neatest, most beautiful paradise, rich in wildlife. Just walking outside the city limits as a 12-year-old, I remember seeing herds of wildebeest, zebra, seeing giraffe, not in a game park, just outside the city limits of Bulawayo, walking to Kami Ruins. And there was every kind of wildlife. It was a magnificent country where we were very free to travel, and it was meant to be in the middle of a war, but we were safer during the war than I think you are there now during peace. And the shops were full to overflowing. No one was starving. In fact, the local people probably had a weight problem rather than a problem of trying to find food. There was an abundance. The harvests were great, and even when we had droughts, nobody starved because there was provisions and there was extras and supplies. And in fact, Rhodesia was one of the 2 most strongest agricultural economies in Africa, only under South Africa. So Rhodesia had the 2nd largest agricultural economy and was exporting food, employing millions of people in the agricultural industry, exporting food, providing most of the foreign currency imports. So how did a country that was a breadbasket of Africa end up in this present state? I mean, John, you've made a lot of visits over the last 10 years to Zim. So what's your understanding? How did it go from such a model paradise country to this seeming hellhole, as some people describe it?
That is a pretty accurate description. It's it's Marxism. So when when ZANU-PF took over and eventually Mugabe became the president, they started to evict the white farmers of, almost said South Africa, of Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. So they started to evict them very violently, very aggressively, beating them. They started to kill off a lot of the wildlife. Poaching started to increase, and not just poaching, just slaughtering of wildlife. People who were from the wrong tribe, the Madabili people, were slaughtered in thousands. So you had this Marxist government that took over. And it's important for people to realize this is what Marxism does. This is what Marxism loves. It's not just that, there were people who took over, who had, who were at war with others or had an axe to grind. They're Marxists. Marxists need to see chaos. They need to see destruction. It's part of their ideology. And so a Marxist government took over and started to destroy the country to the point where, as it was a country that was exporting, to being a country that was import dependent, totally import dependent. In fact, some of the Rhodesian farmers that left Zimbabwe went to Zambia and started to produce food, farming, doing very well in Zambia. The Zambian government loved them. They started to boost Zambian economy, send food back to Zimbabwe, and inside the food packages were saying from ex-Rhodesian farmers. So the government of Zimbabwe wasn't too fond of that, and so they stopped that from happening. So the Marxists started to destroy and decay the society. And now what's very important for the Marxist government is not to totally destroy the people, but while wreaking havoc and destruction, to simultaneously give them some glimmer of hope every now and then. Keep on giving them a little glimmer of hope to keep them going, to keep them persevering, and then crushing them again. So it's brainwashing on a massive scale. And that's a lot of what you see going on right now. When I was going into Zimbabwe, a lot of people would say to me, Mugabe has done a lot of bad things, maybe some wrong things. He's not the best guy. And economically, we're not doing that great. I'd admit to that. And they'd say, but he's quite a peaceful guy. Are you kidding me? I heard a lot of people say that. And at least he's against abortion and same-sex marriage. And so they would catch on to these little glimmers of hope, all the while being crushed at the same time. And that's how the government was oppressing them and controlling them and manipulating them. Excuse me. So when Mnangagwa took over, August last year, people started to have a little bit of hope. Oh, well, we're doing economically very bad and things aren't going great for us and there's no electricity, no water, and it's hard to move around. Mnangagwa, maybe he's the new hope. And as Aliska said, he said to the police and the military, don't harass the foreigners, don't harass the tourists, let's lay off them for a while. So there's more hope, more hope, more hope. And now all of a sudden, some investment, exactly. And now all of a sudden, there's oppression again on a huge, scary level. And so what happened was, he apparently, I can't verify this, but I've heard that he and his pals own all of the fuel industry in Zimbabwe, which is very likely. And so overnight he hiked it up by 200%, so that people were paying 46 Rand a litre for fuel. They were queuing up for fuel for 24 hours at a time, and they were limited to what fuel they could get. People who were going to the shops had to use bond coins, and so they had to go to the bank and stand in a queue at the bank to try and receive more bond coins.
For hours?
It's
not like a short queue.
No. We're talking the whole day. You would have to go, and then you'd only get a little bit of money, depending on who you are, maybe $20 worth of coins, if you're lucky. And that's standing in the queue for the whole day. Sometimes you wouldn't even get to the front. And so that was going on. And eventually the people just, they cracked. They couldn't handle it anymore. And so they started rioting in the streets. We're tired of this fake money. We're tired of standing in queues our whole lives. We're not going to pay 46 Rand a litre, essentially 46 Rand a litre for fuel. This is insane. This is nuts. And it was the next day after Mnangagwa hiked the fuel price that he went on a jet. I think it cost about $2 million with 30 of his people to go and tour Russia. And so the people said, this is insane. And so everything just started going crazy from that point on.
So the people have really reached breaking point.
Absolutely.
And it's been 38 years of hope crushed, more hopes raised, crushed. And so what you've seen in Zimbabwe is the breaking of the human spirit. Now, the statistics are at least half of the population have fled. So more than half the total population of Zimbabwe is living outside its borders. unemployment is somewhere between 90 and 95%. Is that right?
Yes.
So it's staggering. They've endured such inflation that any old person's pensions are worthless. Anybody's savings have been wiped out. Many people have lost their homes, their property, their farms, their heritage, everything. And now anything they ever saved or earned is worth nothing. In fact, you could start working for something that's worth something, but by the end of the month that salary is worth nothing. And anyway, there may not be anything to buy with it. And anyway, your currency isn't worth anything. You've got to queue to get bond coins to be able to get the things you want. By the time you get there, the product might not be there or the price might be unattainable.
Yes.
So basically, not to mention medicines. I mean, a person trying to get medicines that they need to stay alive. We've been asked to take in essential medicines need for people who diabetics, insulin and so on, which they can't get in the country. So the situation is beyond outrageous. So what can one do for the people in Zimbabwe? I mean, let's start, Alicia. What were you doing when you went on the frontline mission to Zimbabwe?
So we were able to bring in 40 of those love boxes that had some medicine and food, and also Bibles. And we were visiting the old age homes, part of our team, and another part of our team went to Masvingo, a more rural area. And so when we were visiting the old age homes, we just went visiting the people and encouraging them, listening to their stories. They were, as I said, most of them were more positive about the future, but the stories they told from their past was, very saddening and shocking. How they were working hard, building up farms, saving up for when they are old, saving their pensions, and then just violently having their farms taken away or don't have any money left in their bank accounts. And one lady told how her family left her there at the old age home, just dropped her off, and moved to Australia. She don't have the address or anything. So people are
Abandoned.
Abandoned. And it was good to be able to listen to them. I think it's good for them as well. But to encourage them in scriptures was something we did through Matthew 6. Seek first the kingdom of God. And that is what we look on towards. And also the resources we sent it was not much in comparison to what they need, but still having people knowing that we are thinking about them, we are praying for them. And there is organizations there that are working to help these people and that are being funded from overseas and so on. So I think what we can do is we can pray for them, we can see how we can maybe give, or how we can go on visits and encourage them and go on mission trips there.
So, John, for a person who says, what can we do? How would you answer?
I think the first is information is vital. There's a lot of information out there on what's going on in Zimbabwe, and it can be confusing to know who you can trust. I would say the people who are reporting from within Zimbabwe are some of the most trustworthy. There's a very good reporter, Kathy Buckle, and we often read her reports of what's going on, and they're very, very good writer, very precise, accurate. She speaks about the problem, she speaks about solution as well. So being informed is vital, and sharing the information with others. A lot of people think, Zimbabwe is just this mess of a country that's north of our borders in South Africa or wherever you are in the world. It's just this messy place. It's never going to come right. But don't allow that to discourage you from investigating to find out what's going on over there and sharing that information with others so that we can pray more effectively and more accurately. There are a lot of missionaries who are still working in Zimbabwe. Frontline Fellowship is working in Zimbabwe. We're taking relief aid to the old age people. There are other ministries that are also taking relief aid to the elderly. I don't want to mention their names because they've been targeted by the government for bribery and looting and all that kind of thing. But there are other ministries going in, so be praying for and supporting those ministries. There are many local pastors within Zimbabwe. And perhaps our listeners don't know the names of all those pastors, but there are faithful pastors over there, particularly in the rural areas. Those are very difficult areas to minister in. There's a lot of drunkenness in those areas, poverty-stricken areas. People are subsistence farmers, and there's been huge droughts in Zimbabwe and all kinds of crises over there. So ministering in those areas is difficult, but pray for the faithful pastors who are there. Also remember that when people are suffering, they're often the most open to hearing the gospel. They're often the most open to hearing good news. There is a day of redemption where God will wipe away every tear. There is a day coming where God will restore all things back to himself. There is a day coming where the wicked will be judged, the righteous will be vindicated. And this is the hope of salvation that we're offering people. So pray for gospel workers in Zimbabwe. The harvest is ripe, but the workers are few. Pray to the Lord of the harvest that he will send out more laborers into his field. So be informed and be interceding, and then you could go yourself if you feel the call to minister to the people in Zimbabwe. Whether it be you actually going physically and ministering to churches in Zimbabwe, ministering to the suffering in Zimbabwe, supporting other ministries that are serving the suffering in Zimbabwe, or by way of pressure, political pressure, writing to Zimbabwean embassies around the world, sharing posts on social media. So there are many different aspects or different ways that you could get involved. You need to prayerfully consider what capacity has the Lord entrusted you with, and how are you using that effectively?
Yes, if you go on the Frontline-Episode.org website, you'll see quite a lot of articles on Zimbabwe. Go on to resources, country reports, Zimbabwe. You'll see on our homepage even some of the most recent, but there's a lot on Zimbabwe. And if you go into our SoundCloud and sermon audio report backs and previous interviews we've had on mission teams in Zimbabwe as well from the front line. So get the information and share it. If you go on Facebook, we've just this day put on the Henry Morton Stanley School of Christian Journalism website, Facebook page, and IDOP Africa, the appeal from a Zimbabwean woman pleading for help and for people to understand what's going on, and speaking a video of some person from within the country putting out a request. And we're regularly sharing on the Frontline Fellowship Facebook page, on the IDOP, International Day of Prayer for the Persecuted Church, IDOP Africa Facebook page, reports for Zimbabwe and other countries where Christians are suffering and restricted. So being informed, sharing this information, getting people to speak at your church, or sharing this with your home cell group or on your social media contacts, all those are things we can do. But there are some people organizing demonstrations. I know in London there's a regular demonstration outside the Zimbabwe embassy by Zimbabweans living in exile in London. And maybe some people could organize prayer vigils outside some of the Zimbabwe embassies, or at least write a letter to your elected representative to put pressure on your government, who's probably giving some kind of foreign aid that's helping Zimbabwe. And that gives leverage. So I think we can all do something. And I know I'm free today because Christians prayed, protested, pressured when I was locked up in Zambia and Mozambique in the past. And even when I was locked up in Sudan, it was Christians praying and pressurizing that let us out and open prison doors. In Luke 18, verse 1, our Lord Jesus says we should always pray and not give up. And he gives the example of the persistent widow and her prayers, and an unrighteous judge who didn't fear God nor care about men, but because of the prayers and the pressure of this persistent widow, he finally saw that justice was done. And so it's so important that we recognize prayer, publicity, and pressure provide protection for the persecuted. So let's be involved. We can all speak up. We can all use our media in one way or the other, whether it's social media, writing letters, making phone calls, phoning radio phone-in programs, or communicating with the elected representative, or even directly with the embassy as well. So, John, other things you'd want to say to people concerning Zimbabwe to help us understand? Good resources like Operation World?
Yes, definitely. So, Operation World, you can go onto the Operation World website or get the Operation World book, and you can find out a lot of what's going on in Zimbabwe. It's slightly older, but at least gives you a feel for the history of Zimbabwe and some points to pray. Get to know what's going on right now in Zimbabwe as well. For example, right now in Zimbabwe, there are major roads that are closed connecting different cities to each other. Some of the big border crossings in Zimbabwe have been closed down, shut down. Bait Bridge, for example, shut down. You know, if people can't get in and out of the country, how are they going to get any help? How are they going to get food for their families? How are they going to get money? The Chirundu border between Zimbabwe and Zambia closed down. In different parts of Zimbabwe, civilians have started to rise up in serious angry protest. And so knowing about some of the more specific information that's going on can help you to pray more effectively, understand the situation a little bit better. You mentioned putting pressure on elected representatives. Do that with a bit more accuracy, so that it'll be more effective. So I think getting better information is really key. And then you can invite frontline missionaries to come and speak at your church or small group or phone-in radio programs or anything like that. If you want some people who have experienced what life is like in Zimbabwe, what God is doing in Zimbabwe, some of the hope and help that is being offered to Zimbabweans, you can get in touch with our mission at Frontline-Mission-SA.org. Yes, you can get all of our contact details over there. So get a frontline missionary in at your church. We don't charge anything for it. We just ask that people pray for the people that we come and speak about.
Indeed. Elishka, from your experience with some of the people you've dealt with in Zimbabwe recently in this last year, what would you add?
That the people there has really went through a hard time. And like John said, their hopes are being built up, being broken down. But that those who are Christians, it gives them more reason to stay strong in faith. And one of the pastors said to, also in his report, wrote that he was crying out, "Why, Lord? There's no resources, there's no helpers." And many of his church members were phoning him for help, saying that they are being beaten up by the government or they are without food. There were 28 families left on that day that still have not gotten any shelter after their homes were broken down. And then he said that through prayer from local churches and so on, he was able to get through it. And another thing I would like to add is that the organizations there are reaching out. It's not as though they are not doing anything. So we can pray for them. And also that the economy, how bad it is going, that they are not allowed to draw from their own bank accounts. So there's no money. And the the online banking system they are using, yes, they did, and the government issued an illegal, they are charging 2% from each transaction that is made online. And that's illegal. So we can maybe put pressure onto that as well, exposing that. And yeah, I just heard a lot of people saying that South Africa is going in the same way. So when we were in Zimbabwe saying, look at what's happening in your country, all the white farmers being murdered and so on. And it really kind of shocked me to hear that, but I can say I must agree.
They can see the writing on the wall in many ways, because what we're hearing right now with Black Land First and the EFF and the ANC and the expropriation without compensation, it's echoes of 1999, 2000, 2001, where it all started, where the wheels came off and when the country committed national suicide, economic suicide. It was a disaster. No country can survive destroying its agricultural base. But more than that, they destroyed respect for life, respect for property, policy of good neighborliness, destroyed the whole structure so that even families are broken apart. One pastor I was speaking to last year at a conference in South Africa, he's a Zimbabwean pastor, told me how they'd had a whole of their members lose their homes because the homes had been bulldozed and destroyed by the Zimbabwe government. And so they, of course, put them up in their church hall, and as best they could, at inadequate facilities, but they rose to the crisis. What else could they do? These people are destitute, middle of winter, cold. So they put them in there. And the riot police arrived, army and police and riot police, at 2 a.m, bolt cutters, cut the chains, locks, the gates, broke into the hall, and the pastor and so on wasn't there, and took all the people, round them up, put them on trucks, and drove them off to who knows where. They didn't know what happened to them. They didn't know if they were alive. They didn't know if they were shot in the back of the head and put down a mine shaft, which happened to many other people in Madabiland. And this is Madabiland that he's talking about. So these are things that have happened, where churches have even been invaded. Now, if this happened almost anywhere in the world, if this was done by a non-communist government, it would be primetime news and CNN and BBC and all the rest, and people would be screaming, how can a government invade a church and take refugees and just take them out? And it was suspected that these people, because they hadn't heard from them since they had been killed, because they'd never heard from them again, they just went in the middle of the night and raided them. So that's one pastor giving his story, and I've heard horror stories in Madabiland. Now, of course, I was there in the 80s, and I heard about the mine shafts, Attica mine, Antelope mine, and all the others where they literally dumped thousands of bodies down mine shafts. And we saw some of the place, spoke some of the people. So we know what Mullen Gagwa, who was in charge of the security forces at that time that did this, is capable of, and we know what Zimbabwe's done in the past. When a country just closes down the communication systems, for whatever reason, they must be hiding something. So, John, last words then to our listeners of direction of how we can pray and what we can do.
I think beyond what we've said people should pray for, there is a pastor, Evan Mawarira. People might remember him from 2017, the hashtag This Flag movement. He's walking around Zimbabwe with the Zimbabwean flag wrapped to his back to protest against just the crisis in Zimbabwe. He came to South Africa. He was very popular at the time, calling for economic reforms and peace in Zimbabwe and all these kinds of things. So anyway, word has it that he has been arrested now in Zimbabwe for insurrection. Now, that is not good. At this stage in Zimbabwe, where there is so much chaos, it's easy for someone like that to almost slip off the media radar. And if that happens, it'll be very bad for him and his family. Who knows what they'll do to him? He might, worst case, he might die. Is that even the worst case? I don't know. They might do worse things to him than kill him. He is responsible for a lot of negative publicity on ZANU-PF, and they hate him. Even
though he's done it in a very peaceful, non-violent, you would think legal, constitutionally protected way.
And he has, correct. So now he has been arrested, and they're talking about 20 years imprisonment for insurrection. So who knows exactly what's going to happen for him. So I would say, just keep your eye on that situation. Pray for that man. Pray for his family. I mean, imagine if it was your father, your husband, your son who was arrested and taken away like that. In such circumstances, pray for him as you would your own family member. Pray for him as though chained with him. And if you can share anything publicly about what is going on with him, please do so.
Yes, this is so important. The Bible tells us to remember the persecuted, to pray for those who are being mistreated for their faith. If one part of the body suffers, we all suffer. We should love our neighbours, and that includes our Zimbabwean neighbours, especially for us in South Africa or in Zambia or Mozambique. We've got near neighbours, Botswana. And many of us know Zimbabweans. We've got Zimbabweans have fled as far as America and Canada and Britain. You might have some Zimbabwean refugees somewhere near you, and find out from them directly what's been going on. It's terrible. It's not right that people and families have been broken up and that their homes and countries have been destroyed. But not only must we speak out and pray and pressure on behalf of the Zimbabweans, but also on behalf of the South Africans, especially the South African farmers, in the very front line of the targets right now of Black Land First, EFF and other racist, Marxist, revolutionary, genocidal groups who are talking about doing even worse to white farmers in South Africa. And so the writing's on the wall, the warnings are there, we should be paying attention. And definitely we should be speaking up and we should be praying. And if your church is not being a house of prayer for all nations at this time, see if you can mobilize your church to remember Zimbabwe and South Africa right now. The church in Africa, bear in mind, is not just a church that's suffering, it's a church that's growing. And I think a lot of the persecution that's taking place is because the church in Africa is dynamic and is strong and is growing. And the anti-Christian forces are in many ways mobilizing against the church because they sense that they're losing and that the church is gaining. And that's why there's a lot of violence and a lot of these things taking place. Because the church in South Africa is very dynamic and strong and missionary sending. So there's a lot more at stake than just the individuals concerned. We're talking about the kingdom of God under attack. And so it's so important that we're united, that we're informed. So be informed, be interceding, be involved. There's a lot that we can do. We can all do something. And by the grace of God, what we can do, we must do. So visit www.frontlinemissionsa.org website. You can also visit the IDOP-Africa website and Facebook pages. See what's on there, share, get informed, get interceding, get involved. God bless and good night.